we read the next couple of Mishnayot, and now we're going to look at them more closely. We were talking, just to put a lot of this into context, we started off by talking about all of the things that one is forbidden to do on Yom Kippur. And of course, the two main things which we learn out from the Torah are eating and drinking. And then the other things, washing, anointing, wearing shoes, and conjugal relations, those are also asur, but they're asur midrabanan. One of the things that we started to look into, in the previous Mishnah, we talked about the status of children on Yom Kippur, that we don't make Inuyim until a year or two before they have to, before they're B'nai Benot Mitzvah. And now we're getting into, in Mishnah Hay, we talked about the Ubra, the Ubara, the pregnant woman, and the sick person. So in other words, now we're getting into exceptions to the rule of people that we do eat, we do either allow them to eat or we make them eat on Yom Kippur. So here in Mishnah Vav, we say Misha Chazo Bulmus. Someone who is overtaken by a bulmus. Bulmus is from a Greek word from the same root as bulimia, and it indicates somebody who has a ravenous hunger, somebody who has like an unnatural sort of hunger. Paul just joined us, so we'll wait for a second. So I see his.
Well, in American history, there was a party called the Bull Moose Party.
Yes, right. I think that meant something else, though. That was from Bull. I know. I've thought about that ever since I learned this Mishnah. But yes, this means something else. Okay, I didn't know if Paul can hear us. He's having trouble connecting. All right, well, hopefully he'll connect in a second. Oh, there we go. Shalom, Paul, מה שלומך?
רגע, אני מיוט אותו, אני לא יודע. שומעים אותי עכשיו?
אני שומע אותך. כן, אז כן, התזמון טוב, כי אנחנו פיתחנו עד כה, ורק עכשיו התחלנו. עשיתי טיפה חזרה, אבל בסדר. אנחנו עומדים במשנה ו'. So, Misha Chazo Bulmus, somebody who is overtaken by a bulmus, who is held onto literally by a bulmus. So, like bulmus, again, like a ravenous kind of hunger. Ma'achilino ta'afilu dvarim tameim ad she'yaru einav. We feed him even things that are tamei. It's even foods that one is not allowed to eat, that the Torah forbids us to eat. We will feed him those things until there's light in his eyes, until his eyes light up. Someone who is bitten by a mad dog. We don't feed him from the liver of the animal, of the dog. Rabbi Matya ben ben Matir. Rabbi Matir ben Charash said that we do feed him from the liver of the dog. The Odamar Rabbi Matia ben Charash, he also said, Choshesh bigrono. Literally someone who has a feeling in his throat. In other words, somebody who's feeling something in his throat. We'll talk about it a little more in depth. Matilin lo sam betoch piv b'Shabbat. We play a sam. Nowadays we use the word sam to mean a drug. A sam would have been probably an herbal remedy, which we'll see also in the Bartanura. In other words, we give him some kind of medication in his mouth on Shabbat. Because he is Sfeik Nefashot. In other words, he is in a situation where his life is in danger. Literally, right? A doubt of lives, or a doubt of his souls, more literally. Anyone who is in mortal danger, or anyone who's in a situation of mortal danger, it pushes away the Shabbat. So let's look through this. So again, as I said a little bit earlier, so what we're talking about here, right now we've gotten up to this point where we're talking about people that are exceptions to the rule that one is not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. So in the previous Mishnah, we had two cases, right? We had of the pregnant woman. So if a pregnant woman smells something and has an urge to eat, then feed her until tashiv nafsha, until until she starts to feel better, and that's up to her. And then we talked about the choleh. So in the previous mission, we talked about choleh, someone who's sick. It was a general category of people who are sick. In a general category of people who are sick, who would need to eat because of their sickness. And it doesn't define the sickness there, but what we talked about is that we would consult experts. So just to remind us, we saw the conclusion of the Gemara as brought by the Bartanura there is that someone who is sick, who says they need to eat, in other words, they claim that they need to eat because of how they're feeling. The Gemara says that we feed them even if experts say they don't need to eat. And the other side of that is somebody who is sick, who claims they don't need to eat. Medical experts say they do need to eat. We also feed them. So machilin here we understand to mean we feed them. In other words, we think that there's some kind of a danger involved, we make sure that they eat. We feed them. It's not optional. In the same way that it's not optional for a healthy person to fast on Yom Kippur, it's optional for a person whose life may be endangered by fasting to not eat on Yom Kippur. So it's ma'achilot, so it means that we, those people who are around them, are responsible to make sure that they eat. And now we have the person. Now we're going to some specific cases. So we say Misha Chazal Bulmus Machilino Tofil Dvarim Tmeim. Now we didn't say this about the other people, the Ubara and the Choleh, specifically for the person who has Bulmus. It says that we feed him even things that are tamei. So let's look at the Bartanura on this. The Bartanura says, Bulmus Choli ha'ochez mechamat avon mesukan lamut. Someone who is overtaken from hunger and he's in danger of dying. Right? So this is a kind of a hunger. It's to a specific medical situation where this person, if he doesn't eat, might die. And when his appearance returns, then we know that he is cured. So that's the way the Bartenu understands what the Mishnah says, Ad shiye oro einav, until his eyes light up. Now, someone who's bitten by a mad dog. So, right, so presumably this is a mad dog, right, what we would call a mad dog. Kelev shoten, Bartanura says, Ruach ra'a shora alav, an evil spirit dwells on him, rests on him, right? The simanim shelo. So here, I'm not an expert in the history of sin as expressed in the Gemara. There is actually a modern book about this, at least one that I know of, which unfortunately I don't have in my library. I should get it. It was written by, his name escapes me right now. He's actually the father-in-law of one of my cousin's daughters. She married his son. Uh, uh, but presumably we're talking about someone who's bitten by a rabid dog. And simanim shelo, the Bartanur says, so the signs of someone who by a rabid dog, the signs of the dog, the simanim are hiv patua, his mouth is open, riro notef, his is dripping down from his, right? So he's like foaming at the mouth, or his spittle is dripping down. Znav sruchot, his ears stink. Ears give off some kind of smell. Uznabo munachado ben yirechotav, and his tail is resting between his thighs. He goes on the sides of the public domain. In other words, he's not presumably means that he's not afraid to be out in public. You know, he's not afraid to be out in public. V'yeshomrim, some people say af noveach bein kolo nishma. Some people say if it also includes even if he barks, but his voice is not heard. These were the that we would see in the dog. So in the case of a person who's bitten, but by the way, I apologize. I'm leaving my phone on the off chance that they call me that they're bringing my luggage. Right? I explained this earlier, so I don't want to turn the phone off just in case they call. Okay, so ein machilin oto mechatzai shalom. So what's this idea of feeding him from the dog's liver? This was a like an antidote that was prescribed by doctors. This is not considered to be a a reliable medication that we would allow him to eat. We would allow him the isur of eating behema tameya. Okay, so this is in contrast to the person who was overtaken by a bull moose, right? Where the Mishnah says we would feed him dvarim tmeim. So the person who was bitten by a mad dog, we're not quick to give him such a refuah. So let's just think about this for a moment. In the case of the bull moose, it says we feed him even things that are tameh, right? So tameh meaning like the way Torah talks about varim tameim, like you have behemot and chayot and the filter or tameh, meaning that you were to slaughter them properly, you would not be allowed to eat them. It doesn't mean food that's kosher that became tameh in the sense that it would be something, let's say, that a kohen is not allowed to eat, or you're not allowed to eat something tameh and then go into the mikdash. When it talks about dvarim tameh, right? So in other words, for people who are not kohanim and somebody who's not going into the mikdash, there is no door in the Torah for you to eat food that became tameh, right? And we do it all the time now, right? But that's because we don't have much choice. But when the Mishnah uses the term dvarim tameim, it's referring to tameh in a different sense. It's referring to animals that the Torah categorizes as tameh, and those we're not allowed to eat no matter what, right? Except in certain particular cases. And one case be if it's Yom Kippur, Mishachazo Bumus. So when the Mishnah says somebody who has been overtaken by Bumus, him even Dvarim Tmeim, what does that imply to us? Like, why does it point out that you can feed him even Dvarim Tmeim? What is that adding? It doesn't just say that we feed him.
I think it emphasizes the danger that they felt that person was in.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, this person is in such a danger of dying because there's sickness that even if the only food you have is Dvarim Tmeim, we would still find that. So why don't we say that about the person who was bitten by a mad dog, right? So in the case of the mad dog, we understand that apparently there were doctors who said if you're bitten by a mad dog, then apparently what you would have done is slaughter the dog and take liver and eat the liver. That was supposed to be an antidote. So why don't we do that for the person who was bitten by the mad dog?
Maybe it doesn't have to be done immediately.
Well, what I just so what
Medically,
medically
it doesn't. Perhaps medically, it doesn't have to be done immediately.
or it doesn't have to be done maybe at all, because in other words, the Bartanura says, even though this is the way, this is what doctors prescribed, but it's not really considered to be and I'll translate this here as a reliable medication. It's not reliably going to cure him of his having been bit by this mad dog. So what's the difference between the person what's the difference in terms of their medical situation? The person who has bulmus as opposed to the person who's bitten by the mad dog.
The person with the bull moose has got a chance to survive, but the person who was with the mad dog well, he has no chance to survive. Well, we know that today. I don't know if they knew that.
So that's an interesting possibility. That's an interesting possibility, but it's not necessarily what we get from the information we have here. There's another difference. There's a more basic difference.
I mean, from so for the person of bull moose, the food is a remedy that can save his life. For the person who's been bitten by a mad dog, it's only, the specific food that conventionally is prescribed will not necessarily save his life. In fact, it doesn't seem that it's going to save his life at all. So therefore.
Okay, exactly. So in other words, the main difference between them here at CERN is that we're not allowed, the baseline is you're not allowed to eat on your, and then we'll have the exceptions. So one of the exceptions is if we know that eating is going to cure you of some kind of a deathly illness. So the person that has bull moose, we know that that's the proper way of treating them. If they don't eat, they could die. And if they do eat, then they should be able to live. The person who was bitten by the mad dog, it's not hungry. It's not that he feels the need to eat. It's just that we thought maybe there's a yeshum hava amina, some possibility, because the conventional wisdom advises that such a person should eat the liver of the dog, that we might think that we should feed him, not because he's hungry, not because eating any other kind of food is going to cure him. It's just that here we thought this particular food would cure him, and the Chachamim say no, because it's not a reliable cure. It's not going to necessarily help him. And I think it's important to point out, interesting, that apparently the Chachamim here, right, the unnamed Chachamim, the Tanakama, doesn't even think it's really a safek. In other words, he doesn't think that there's even like a certain percentage chance that he's going to live if he eats this dog liver, because we just learned at the end of the Mishnah, it says kol spek nafashot docheh et Shabbat, right? And obviously also in our context, spek also docheh Yom Kippur. So if we had outside safek that maybe if he eats the dog would live, then we would say go ahead and feed him the dog liver. But apparently, the Tanakama holds it's not going to help him at all. The way the Bartanura phrases it, "Einan refuah gemura v'hatir lo isur." So you might think that from the Bartanura then implies that, okay, it's not a refuah gemura, but maybe it could help. But apparently not. Apparently the Tanakama holds that it's not even enough of a safek that it might help that we allow him to eat it. But that main difference between Ishachazot Bulmus and Shakol Chelev Shoteh is that the person who has Bulmus has to eat. He has to eat something. In fact, we eat anything, even things that are not kosher. If that's all we have, that's what we'll let him eat. In the case of the person who's bitten by the mad dog, the Tanakama holds eating something is not going to help him. So we don't feed him. We don't feed him the kaved of the dog. Rabbi Mati ben Charash Matzir. Go ahead.
Yes, a kelev shoteh doesn't have to be a kelev with rabies. It could be just a dog who lost his את הבעל שלו, כן? It's not obvious. Bartanura
You're right.
describes him as a dog with rabies, but maybe the Tanakama doesn't think like that.
Well, hopefully when we get, God willing, we'll get to the Gemara. Maybe we'll look into this a little bit further. But you're correct in the sense that from the Mishnah doesn't give us the definition, right? The Bartanur is basing this on the Gemara, that the Gemara understood the signs of the Kelev Shoten, and whether that means that the dog is rabid or not, I don't know. But apparently, it seems to be referring to a rabid dog. And Rabbi Mati ben Charash matir. Rabbi Mati ben Charash is matir. He allows us to feed the person who is bitten by the mad dog. Where he allows him to eat the dog liver. Because why? Because he holds in fact that this was a complete cure for him. That this was something that was a reliable cure. The Ein Halacha like Rabbi Mati ben Charash, but Halacha is not like Rabbi Mati ben Charash. So the way the
is the measure whether it's reliable cure or whether it could be a cure? Because it seems like even if there is the slightest chance that could be a cure, one could still do it because it still could be potentially pekuach nefesh. So, I mean, what is the measure for Rabbi Batya?
Right. So, very good. Right. So, building on what we said a little bit earlier, we would ask this question: may it have to be a refuah gemura in order for us to allow this to eat it? Maybe it's enough for us to think that it might work. The fact that it was prescribed by doctors indicated that people at least thought that it worked. So maybe that would be the reason for Rabbi Mati ben Charash. That again, it's not the way the Bartanura seems to go. And this is something that we have to look at more closely when we come back to the sugya. Because I could argue that what you just said, right? That maybe Rabbi Mati ben Charash is matir just because it's a safek, maybe it will work. But that doesn't seem to be the way Bartanura goes, and we have to understand why does the Bartanura explain the way he does? Why does he take that tack? So those are the first two cases in the Mishnah, and then we have another case from Rabbi Mati ben. He says, "Achoshesh bigrono," someone who has some kind of feeling, like a sense of pain or something wrong that's in his throat. Then we place a sam in his mouth on Shabbat. So he's switching over, talking about our topic, which is Eid and Yom Kippur, to play. It doesn't say that the person ingests this; it just says we place it in his mouth. So what is all this? The Bartanur explains the Choshesh. He has a girsa, right? So our girsa is a Choshesh bigrono. He has a feeling in his throat. The Bartanura, he says, a Choshesh b'shinav, somebody who has a toothache, he has an aching in his teeth. So as he explains, Shemathil b'sar ha'chanichim v'hitakel, that the flesh of his gums is starting to be consumed, right? So it sounds like he has an infection in his gums. That seems to be what the Bartanur is talking about. Misham holef lafech, and feels it there in his. Then it's going to go to his palate. with the garon, and then it'll go to his throat. It's like he has some kind of an infection, and if we don't take care of it, it's going to worsen, and the infection is going to spread. So what's the solution? Matililo sam. Bartanura says, Shoresh Estev. We give him the root of the grass as medication. Right? So apparently there was a specific herb or grass that they would use to treat this kind of infection. And so what's the problem? Why wouldn't you be able to do that on Shabbat normally?
One conventionally doesn't do refuah on Shabbat.
Right. So conventionally we don't treat people who are sick on Shabbat, but we'll see this Mishnah here is one of the certain sources for distinguishing between different kinds of sick people. Right. So in this case, if somebody is choshesh, I'll use the gears of the Bartanura, choshesh b'tav, then you're supposed to treat that. And it seems like why, based on what we see in the Bartanura, what would be the reason that we would say you should treat that now on Shabbat?
But pekuach nefesh, or even just the possibility of pekuach nefesh.
Well, again, based on, yes, I want you to say something more specific. What did the Bartanura just say? What does he say the problem is if somebody has this kind of, he says toothache, meaning really a gum ache, like what's the problem? What are we worried about?
Could spread to his throat. And it's
spread
not.
To his throat. Go ahead. You can conjecture from there because he doesn't say anymore.
It's spread to his throat, and it could be. Either it could cause less. So the question is, what's the danger? Would just like cause danger or extreme discomfort to his body, or is it in fact a case of sakanat nafsho?
All right, so you're right in the sense that the Bartanura doesn't explain further, but we do see from the Mishnah, right? So the Mishnah says, "Achoshesh bigrono matilimo sam betoch piv b'Shabbat libnei shehu spek nafashot." The reason we do it is because of spek nafashot, meaning that there is some danger that the person could become deathly ill. Right? We're worried about his nefesh in the sense that we're worried that he could die. So the tilino sam, so that you're correct. Normally the default, the baseline is we don't do refuah on Shabbat. But now we understand that there are cases when you do refuah on Shabbat. So we have to distinguish. So this is where we get the idea. There's such a thing as a cholesh sheyesh bo sakana, b'cholesh she'ein bo sakana. So what does it mean, sakana? So the idea would be if somebody is in danger, that if we don't treat them, they could become deathly ill, meaning that ultimately they could die if we don't treat them now. So this seems to be the point that Rabbi Matib and Harash is making, that even though this pain that he's feeling, or the sensation that he's feeling in his gums, at that moment we don't think he's dead, but we understand that if we don't treat it now, it could get worse. So if we wait to treat it until after Shabbat, then it might be too late to treat it at all. And maybe the person's going to end up dying or become very, very ill. So this is an introduction to this idea of the chodesh yesh bo sakana, and the chodesh yesh bo sakana. Now we understand that even if the sakana is not immediate, but we know that it's the logical outcome of not being treated. It's the expected outcome of not being treated now. Then we don't wait till after Shabbat to treat them. We treat them now in order to prevent the deathly habit, right, the more morbid aspect coming later. So whatever this sum was, I don't know. Maybe I'll be able to find out by the time we get back to it. But this was a treatment that was used apparently to stop the spread of the infection. So again, it's not that he's eating it, and also the context here is so let's step back. So why is the Mishnah bringing this here? It's not about Yom Kippur. Why is the Mishnah talking about this here?
It's the same Tana.
First of all, it's the same Tana. And second of all, in other words, it's the same Tana, right, who said that you that was on Yom Kippur. And what's so we could also think, okay, but maybe Rabbi Mati ben Charash said a lot of things. Maybe he said things about Kodashim, maybe he said things about Nizikin. Why are we bringing this particular halacha here of Rabbi Mati ben Charash?
It's related in the sense that he's giving you a heter for something that's safek nefashot.
Correct. Very good.
And moreover, since melacha is forbidden on Yom Kippur, if it's forbidden on Shabbat, it also would be forbidden on kol v'chomer would be forbidden on kol v'chomer would be forbidden on Yom Kippur.
Well, it's not necessarily correct to say kol v'chomer.
You're right.
Right.
Okay, no, it's not called. But since malacha, which by definition are things that are forbidden
Well, we're
on
not
Shabbat.
talking here about malacha. We're not really talking about malacha either. But your basic point is correct. The basic point that you're saying is building on what Michael Schwartz said. So Michael Schwartz points out correctly that the point here is Mineshu Safek Nefashot. And now we understand. So Rabbi Mati ben Charash talked about Matilin lo sam b'toch pi b'Shabbat because it's Safek Nefashot. But now I understand that's really the context of the entire Mishnah. That why is it that we allow the person, not just allow, why is it that we feed the person who has the bulmus on Yom Kippur? It's also Safek Nefashot. It's bringing in the same context. So it goes back to a root that's related already to Shabbat. By the way, the reason I said that it's not necessarily called the Chomer on Yom Kippur is we will talk about this, that for certain halachic aspects, Yom Kippur is not as chamur as Shabbat, but of course it's different than Shabbat. We'll talk about that. So it's not necessarily called v'chomer, but you would say that it's related, right? Because they're both asur b'melacha, and that I think that's what you were trying to get at. Both Shabbat and Yom Kippur are asur b'melacha. They're not both asur b'inuyim, right? Or they're not asur b'achila v'shtiyah, but they do have this relationship that they're both asur b'melacha. And we understand that there's certain times that we are going to violate. Now we understand that there's certain times we'll violate. In Chatchila, we will violate Shabbat because of Safek Nefashot. Safek Nefashot is dochet to Shabbat. It pushes away Shabbat. So We talked a teeny bit about that in the last shiur. We'll talk more about this idea of the Zechiyat Shabbat as opposed to Matir Shabbat. There's certain things that we allow you to do on Shabbat because we're dochet Shabbat. We push it aside. Pushing it aside implies that we push it aside, but we're still mindful that it's Shabbat. So that might restrict how much we push it aside. Say something is mutar, like if I'm matir Shabbat, then I would say I don't have any restrictions at all. And I brought an example from the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach, the Gemara concludes that you bring, if most of the tzibur may, when it's time to shech the Korban Pesach, so the Torah says you're not allowed to bring the right. A tamei is not supposed to eat from the Korban Pesach. The Gemara learns out that if most of the tzibur is tamei, then you do bring the Korban Pesach. You bring it b'tumah, and the idea there is that tumah tzibur. Tumah is made permissible in the tzibur, right? If most of the community is tamei, then we're matir. In other words, we take away all restrictions related to tumah in order to bring the Korban Pesach. But when we talk about Shabbat, is it implies that we're not completely matir, but we're docher. So let's see what Bartanura says about Kol Safek Nefashot Dochet Shabbat. All Safek Nefashot pushes away the Shabbat. So Kol, the use of the term all, every Safek Nefashot, what does that imply? La'atoye gon d'pshitalan d'b'shabu lo yamut. That comes to include a case where it's obvious to us that this person is not going to die now on this Shabbat. Somebody is sick and know that they're not going to die before the end of Shabbat. Ela safek she'im lo ya'asu lo hayom shema yamut l'Shabbat ha'ba'ah. Rather doubt now in our minds because of his medical situation that if we don't do something for him today on this Shabbat, he die by next Shabbat. Uchegon, for example, damduhu lishtot sams manya yome. For example, that they I think of the word, but like it's not from the word measure, but that's the word that's coming to mind. They evaluated him that he has to drink this herb for 8 days, right? In other words, the doctor says in order to cure, let's say, this issue of Hoshesh B'Shinav, maybe he has to take some kind of medication for 8 days. It's not enough for him to take it now. He has to take it for 8 days straight, beginning now. The Yoma Kama Shabbat. And the first day that he would take it is now on Shabbat. Mahu Detema, what would you think? So you might think, okay, let's hold him back from taking this medication until nightfall, until after Shabbat, so that he doesn't have to violate 2 Shabbos. Kamash, so comes to teach us that no, if the doctors say he needs to take the medication for 8 days straight, beginning now, we don't play with that. We're going to follow the doctor's prescription and give it to him now. And so this particular concept is something that we're very familiar with nowadays, right? Maybe you have, I'll take an example, you have an infection and maybe you have to take an antibiotic, and the doctor says you're going to have to take a cycle of antibiotics for 10 days. So depending on your current medical situation, the doctor may say you have to take the first dose now, and you're going to have to take it next Shabbat. This is something that we see all the time. For example, I take medication for blood pressure. I'm supposed to take it every day. Now, if I miss a day, I'm not going to die. But nonetheless, I take it every day because it's ultimately there for this, to keep me from getting closer to some kind of, God forbid, situation like a stroke or something like that. So this is where we learn from here, right? So we understand that the person, the cholesh yesh bo sakana, includes a person who is in a medical situation where their life is in danger, but not necessarily immediate danger. The doctors have evaluated this person to understand that if they don't start treatment now, then they could come to a life-threatening situation.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
And I'm pretty sure that I know what the answer is, but I think I'll ask the question anyways. Which is, how do we understand the phrase doche b'Shabbat? Does it mean that this particular action pushes off Shabbat, but as soon as you complete this action, the Shabbat restrictions in general still apply? Or does it mean once you do this action, you're no longer in Shabbat?
So what do you think?
Probably the former.
Yeah, so I think it's two things. So I would say certainly means the former. Certainly means that just because now you had to be mechalel Shabbat, just because you had to be mechalel Shabbat now, it doesn't mean that you're out of Shabbat. The idea that the chiyah of Shabbat means, and I think we'll see this in greater detail when we come to this. You're going to do whatever is necessary more than what's necessary. You don't do more than what's necessary. So look, because we understand now it says kol safek nefashot, if you're in doubt. So in doubt about what's necessary, you're going to err, you will err aside of making sure that you're going to save this person's life or you're going to keep them healthy. You don't do more than is necessary. And we'll see there are other examples of this where we will we'll be able to break it down more specifically. But this is a foundational Mishnah. This is a very foundational concept, the Gabe Shabbat. And so it will also be true. So now I can say the Kal V'chomer the other way. If this is something that I do on Shabbat to save someone's life, Shabbat is Chamur, right? Shabbat is the Chomer. Then Kal V'chomer, I would do this on Yom Kippur or on Yom Tov. That's the Kal V'chomer, because Shabbat is actually the most Chamur, the most. This is something else we're going to learn Behemshech. I'm not sure we're going to get to it after all, but we are going to talk Mishnah. We're going to talk about the way Aveirot are graded. Go ahead, Mike.
So that this is even though Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur is referred to as Shabbat Shabbaton.
Even though the Torah talks about Yom Kippur as Shabbat Shabbaton, but in terms of the chomer of the punishment, we'll see the chomer punishment is greater for Shabbat than for Yom Kippur. But you make a point, and hopefully, as we get through this parak, we're going to understand how Chazal understood Shabbat Shabbaton. Okay, so now we come to Mishnah. Go ahead.
This is not the popular conception that Yom Kippur is more severe than Shabbat. People who don't take a car who do take a car on Shabbat, they wouldn't take a car on Yom Kippur or things like that.
So this is something that I do want to, I want to talk about, and as I say, we'll get to, because they're not wrong. And Michael Werner, you also weren't wrong in saying that in other words, there is a chomer aspect to Yom Kippur. The immediate chumrah of Yom Kippur, we understand, is in terms of the Isur. Yom Kippur is asur b'mlacha, and it's also asur, in all the things that, all the iyim, right? So it sounds like it's building on Shabbat, and we could also understand it that there's a tzad chumrah, not mitzad the particular isurim, but there's a tzad chumrah because of chomer hayom, right? Because of what the day means, the day implies in terms of doing tshuva, in terms of getting kapah. We don't see Shabbat in that same light. But when we talk about a halakhic context, we have to be careful. So I think I'm going to leave it at that for now. And this is a topic that we'll get to more toward the end of the parak, about the chomer of Yom Kippur. Okay, so now we come to this also very foundational Mishnah of Misha Nafla Alav Mapolet. Someone that like a rock slab fell on him, or a building collapsed on him. Somebody who some structure or something fell on him. Safek Usham, Safek Sham. So we're in doubt whether he is there. We're in doubt whether he's not there. So a moment ago it said somebody that fell upon him on a polar. And now we're in. So what does it mean? We're not sure if he's there or not. What does that mean in light of the fact that said Misha Nafla Alav Mapolet? What's the situation?
Oh, if he's alive or dead.
No, that's the next thing. Safek mate. Usham Safek Enosham is we're not sure
if he
there.
is below the Mapolet or not. It's not obvious.
Right. It's not obvious. So let's say you see somebody across the street, and let's say you see them walk into an old building, and then a minute later the building collapses. So Misha Nafla Alav Mapolet is lav dafka. It means that we think that a mapolet fell on. But now I don't know for sure if he's there or not. Maybe he went out back door before the building collapsed and he's off somewhere. So the first safek is, I don't know if he's there or not. That is, this person, I thought that they may have been in a situation where their life was in danger. So the first safek is, I'm not even sure if he was in that situation, but there's a chance that he or she was. The second safek is safek chai, safek mei. Maybe I know for sure that they're there. In other words, let's clear the first safek. They walked in, and I actually witnessed the building collapse on them. I know for sure they're there. But now I don't know if they're alive or dead. Safek Nachri, Safek Yisrael. I don't know this person. I don't know if they're a non-Jew or a Jew. Implying what? That if they're a non-Jew, then what's the implication?
There isn't the same obligation to dig through the rubble and see if he's there.
Right. So that's the plain shot of the Mishnah is what the idea that you might dig through the rubble to save somebody's life is only going to a Jew. We'll see in halacha, it's ultimately not necessarily the case, but let's say in this basic theoretical halacha, it would be the case. So, safek chai, safek meit. So, again, when I come to safek chai, safek meit, so that presumes that the first safek is already gone. I'm sure they're there. Then I say, I don't know if they're alive or dead. And then when I say safek nachri, safek Yisrael, that's the next level of safek. Maybe they're alive, but maybe they're not Jewish. But in all of these sfekot, mefakhin alav et gal, uncover from him this pile of rocks, this pile of rubble. Mitza'u chai. So if they find him that he's alive, if you find that the person is alive, mefakhin alav, then you uncover for him. The imate yanichuhu. If you find him dead, then you leave him. So let's just understand the words of the Mishnah. And then if you find him alive, so what does that mean? You uncovered him, you found out that he's alive, and now what do you do? What does it mean, you're already mefakeh.
Uncover him enough to know if he's alive or dead. And if you find that he's alive, then you uncover the rest of it to actually dig him out.
So if you find, so in that seems in line with this principle that we just learned. That is, if you find him alive, then the assumption is going to be you're not going to leave him there until the end of Shabbat to complete digging him out, because there would be an assumption that you need to remove him from that situation entirely. We're not going to depend on the possibility that maybe he'll survive till after Shabbat. We're going to depend on the possibility that even if he survives Shabbat, but if we don't dig him out now, there's a much higher chance of dying. So as soon as we find that he is alive, we continue to dig him out, to take him out of the situation as best we can. But if he's dead, then so there's no heter to uncover a dead person from such a situation. So let's see how the Bartanura understands this mission. With Bartanura says, right? So we talked about this, right? The word, the fakeh, means to uncover. We use it every day in davening, right? What do we say in davening? In Birkot HaShachar, where do we use the root, the fakeh? We say it every morning. Baruch atah Hashem, Pokeh ivrim. So what does it mean that Hashem is pokeach ivrim?
Uncovers the eyes of the blind. He uncovers the eyes of the blind, as it were, or he opens the eyes of the blind.
He opens the eyes of the blind, right? So right. So we understand that's the literal meaning of the pakeach. And it has right. So it has secondary meanings. So we also use right. Lefakeach also means like to supervise or to overlook. But it means that it refers to this idea of awareness. So pakeach ivrim means that he makes the blind to see, to makes them aware. So open our eyes, we're supposed to say pokeach ivrim, because until close man that we're asleep and our eyes were closed, then we were blind, right? We didn't see, and now we see. So the basic meaning of the pakeach is the way it's used in the Mishnah here. It's to uncover. So mefakrin alav, practically in this case, it means that you're going to dig. We dig the pile and we look for him. Now the Barchino is going to get more specific, and this is based on the sugya of the Gemara here. If they checked until his nose, bein milamala lamata, rather from the top down. In other words, from the top. Let's say he was buried upright, and you start to uncover the top of his head, and you get down to the nose. Bein milamata lamala. Maybe he was prostrate. You don't know where to start. You just start digging, and you're coming up from, let's say, the bottom part of his body up to the nose. In other words, it doesn't matter which side you're coming from. The lo matzu bo neshama, and if they found he had no breath, he was no longer breathing, yadu shehu meit, then it's known that he's dead. The shuv ein mefakrin alav, and then you don't continue to dig for him. Dichtiv kol asher nishmat ruach hayim bi'apav. Right, that's from Parshat Noach. Kol asher nishmat ruach hayim bi'apav mikol charavam meitu. Right, all of the animals and all of the humans who weren't in Tevat Noach died. Anything that did not have the breath of the spirit of life in their nose. So this is also a very foundational concept that from here poskim learn that the way we're going to define is dead is if they stop breathing, if they no longer respire, dead. And the significance of talking about which direction you're digging from would be this. And again, this is something that I think we'll probably spend some time on, because this is very this topic is still very much with us about what the definition of death is. The difference would be if you uncovered him, the top of the head down, you don't know whether the heart is beating. And it's possible for someone's heart to continue beating after they can no longer respire. In a normal person, when they die, when they can spontaneously breathe, their heart could still beat for not a long time without help. It won't beat for a long time, but it could beat for another minute or two. So if you dug from the bottom up and you found that their heart is beating, you still have to that's not necessarily a sign that they're alive. You still would have, but it is a sign they might be alive. So you have to continue digging to see if they're breathing. But if you dig from the top, even if you don't know if the heart is beating or not, if you're no longer breathing, you don't have to dig anything. You don't have to find out if their heart is beating. So what I'm saying to you is it's the plain pshat in the Bartanura, which is also the plain pshat in the Gemara. But there are people who disagree with this and say that until the heart has stopped beating, a person is halachically considered to be alive. I want to finish the Bartanura here, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. And I think this is something that we'll also go into some greater depth on. But let's finish the Bartanura. So if they find him alive, they dig for him. So what does that add? That would seem to be obvious. That if you find him alive, you're going to continue digging. So the Bartanura says, Lo nitzrucha ela shara ubo she'i efshar sheyichya ela chaye sha'a. So with this, we don't need the Mishnah to tell us that we continue digging for him, except for this case, where they saw that he's only going to live now for another few moments. Chaye sha'a. In other words, he's not going to live very long. He's not likely to make it till the end of Shabbat. Umiyad hu meit. He's going to die any minute. Kamash malan. So the Mishnah teaches us the mefakrin alav bishvil oto chaye sha'a. The Mishnah teaches us that you still dig to keep him alive for that short period of time. This is also a very important concept and also very difficult in practical halakha. We'll talk about it in relationship to now, but that's the basic idea. The basic idea is that we do whatever we can for a person to keep him, for a person who's about to die, keep them alive. So in this case, what we're going to do to keep them alive, even for another minutes, is to dig a pile of stones from them. But of course, there could be other things, right? So we can understand, we can transfer this to many situations that we encounter today, which I'll come back to and talk about in a minute. So then it says, "V'imeit yanichuhu." Right? The Mishnah says that if he died, then you leave him, or in the Girsa of the Bartanura, ein mefakrin alav. Right? If he dies, you don't dig for him. So what is that at? That would seem to, once I know mitzau chaim mefakrin alav, I know by implication that if I find him that dead, that I don't continue to dig for him. So what does it add? What is the Mishnah adding when it says he made? Hakamash malan da'afilu divrei hamatzilin et hamet mibnei hadleka baha moded de'ein mefakli. This comes to teach us something else, that and we come back to this, we'll look at this. There's a Mishnah on Shabbat that talks about how we deal with fire if it breaks out on Shabbat. So what if a fire breaks out in a house where there's a dead body? There's a manda amar that you still have to do what you can to save the dead body from being burnt in this fire. But Baha Modeh Mefakli. So the Mishnah here, though, says, made, and Mefakrin alav, That's even according to the person who says that you would save a dead body from a fire on Shabbat. Here, he would agree, he would acknowledge that you don't continue to dig out a dead person from a pile on Shabbat. Why? That person's, you're allowed to move the dead body on Shabbat and to remove it from the fire. If we don't allow you to say dead body on Shabbat, maybe it's a close relative, maybe it's your close, maybe it's your, your wife or your child. We're afraid that if we don't say to you, you're allowed to save a dead body on fire, then that person is going to put the fire, and that's asur, right? You're not allowed to put out a fire on Shabbat and why are we afraid of that? Because the person is bahula meto, right? He's excited, he's overly excited, or he's because of his excitement, he's not going to be thinking straight, and the first thing he'll do would be to put out the fire. So in order to avoid having him put out the fire, we're allowed to remove the mate from the fire. But here, Ilo Sharid the here, if we don't allow him to uncover the pile of rocks, what could he do that would be forbidden by the Torah? Who would permit this literally in front of others, but others because of this. In other words, in the case of the mate in the fire, we're afraid that if we don't allow him to remove the mate, he's going to put out the fire. Here, if we don't allow him to take out the body, so what's he going to do? It won't want him to do another Isur Shabbat. So that's the whole point, is that the chidush of the last mate and mafaklina love is just to say, even if you hold that we permit you to remove a dead from the fire, that's only because we're afraid that otherwise you'll put out the fire. But here we don't allow you to continue digging for a dead body. You can dig it out after Shabbat. We don't let you do it on Shabbat. Because if we just forbid you from doing it, we're not afraid that you're going to do something that's even worse. Because there isn't anything else for you to do. Okay, so one of the things that we should mention, this Mishnah, the immediate context for it was the second Ma'amar of Rabbi Mati ben Harash, which is about Shabbat. And it's continuing on the last line, Shabbat. And so this is talking essentially about Shabbat. But of course, again, if this is something if this is the procedure for Shabbat, it will also be true for Yom Tov and Yom Kippur, presumably. So, building on this idea of so here's also a case where we see the Dechiyah, that Shabbat is pushed away. That is, if I said Shabbat is Hutra, that Shabbat became permissible, then as soon as I have any one Safek, I wouldn't have to worry. I would just dig out the whole thing no matter what. Like I wouldn't have to worry about any other Sfekot. I would just, if Shabbat is mutar, now it's at that moment I would say Shabbat doesn't exist for this issue. But I see the way the Mishnah breaks it down, that at each Safek, so Safek Sham, Safek Eno Sham, if you know for sure they're not there, then of course you're not going to dig. If you know for sure that he's dead, you're not going to dig. If you know for sure that he's a Nachri, you're not going to dig. Okay, because it's almost the end of the shiur, I'll just mention issues that are pertinent to this Mishnah, and then we'll look into them more closely. This question of at what point do we consider someone to be dead? Throughout halachic history, we need to know when someone is dead for various reasons. So so here we have one reason. One of the reasons we need to know if this person is dead or not is because we need to know if we're going to be Mechalel Shabbat. What are other reasons that it's important for us to know if someone is alive or dead?
A woman getting remarried.
Sorry, 1 second. There's a lot of. Okay. Say it again.
A woman getting married or remarried.
Yes. Can you be more specific?
So if her husband is still alive, she can't marry someone else. If he's dead, she wants to be remarried, and so there has to be a decision as to the status of the husband.
So we would need to know the status of the husband, and then the Gemara actually, I think this is partly maybe what you're building on. It can make a very big difference to a woman if she is divorced or widowed, and there can be a situation where depending on when the husband died, she might be divorced or she might be widowed. So that's a very important point. That's one of the reasons we would know we would need to know at what moment was somebody dead. Any other reasons that we can think of?
Observance of the site. I mean, it would make sense to know exactly when the death happened.
You go back before your side in terms of when Shiva begins, when is the person, when is the survivor an onen, right? So the first stage is aminut. At what point is the person an onen, and are we going to start counting Shiva, right? So somebody dies, so there's svekot, right? If somebody dies ben hashmashot, or we're not sure if somebody's alive or dead, right? We'll need to know for that purpose. Any other things that you can think of?
I'm going to say presumably inheritance and issues like that.
It will, right. It can be significant for issues of inheritance to know at what point somebody died. So there also, if somebody gives a will before their death, or gives a will, if they say in front of witnesses that they're going to give away all of their property before they die, then the children won't inherit. Or if he says, I'm giving all of my property away equally to all of my children before I die, and there's a bechor, so it means that the bechor will not take a double portion. But if that doesn't happen before he dies, then after he dies, then it's going to go by the laws of inheritance as prescribed by the Torah. So it could make a difference. It'll make a difference. Kohen, right? A Kohen is not allowed to come to mate, and so it would be important for a Kohen to know. Let's say if they're in the same building as a person who's about to die, if they're actually dead or not. so these are some of the examples why it's important for us to know if somebody's alive or dead. In modern times, by the way, there's also something that you might know historically. In the 19th century, this actually became an issue in certain countries in Europe, and I think it also happened in other times in history, but it was a real important thing that happened in certain parts of Europe. That there were laws passed that said you were not allowed to bury a dead person for 3 days because they wanted to make sure that they weren't burying a person who was actually alive. This was a real fear. And so they would wait 3 days and then be like the doctor would examine them after 3 days and make sure that they're really dead. This comes up in the tshuva of the Chatam Sofer, which I won't get into tonight, but that was a real fear. In modern times, beginning essentially from the 60s, we now have another layer of things to be concerned about, and that's about if somebody is sufficient, if somebody's actually dead, and we could use their heart to save someone else's life. So we would need to know that they are certainly dead before we would remove their heart. So this is a very modern consideration because heart transplants only became an actual reality in the 60s. You may remember, I vaguely remember because I was a kid, but you might know the history. The first heart transplant was done in South Africa. It wasn't done in the United States because the United States wouldn't permit it at that time. And the reason they wouldn't permit it is because in order to do a heart transplant, you need to take a beating heart. You have to take a heart that's actually still viable. Once the heart stops beating, there's almost no time between that moment and the time that it's still viable to use a transplant. So the United States wouldn't allow it because the assumption was that if you remove a beating heart from somebody, you're killing them. And so that would be murder. But in light of the technology that developed for heart transplants, by the way, of course, this is not true for most other organs, right? So if somebody dies, dead, according to all medical opinion, you can still take any number of other organs, right? You can take their liver, you can take their kidneys. There are other things that are still you can take their skin. There are other things that are still going to be viable even after death. Heart, though, is a special case. So in light of this issue, so it became, of course, a medical issue and an ethical issue. And there was a council, I don't remember exactly what you would call it, like a committee that was formed at Harvard to determine what is the medical definition of death. And they came up with what became known as the Harvard criteria. And the basic point of the Harvard criteria was to say that once a person's brain is dead, including their brain stem, which controls the automatic functions of the body, including respiration. If the brain is entirely dead, then they said for all intents and purposes that person is dead, and then you would be allowed to remove their heart. And so the point is that you can have a person who no longer can spontaneously respire, right? In other words, the only way that they can breathe would be if you put them on an artificial respirator. But if they can no longer spontaneously respire, according to the Harvard criteria, they are dead, and you would be allowed to remove the heart, even though the heart could still be beating. The heart could still be beating after spontaneous respiration ceases. So, of course, in halachic circles, this also became an issue. And there's actually still a controversy till this day, where there's one side of the argument says, based on the Mishnah and the Gemara here and other sources, which I think when we get back to this Mishnah, I'll go through some of them with you, that the halachic definition of death is exactly that. When a person stops breathing on their own, they are, for halachic purposes, dead. So even though their heart is still beating, and even though the body might still feel warm, because there's still blood that's circulating in the body, you can move the heart and use it for a transplant to save somebody else's life. Other people argue, no, that the cessation of spontaneous respiration is not enough, and the person's heart also has to beat it. So that's, in a nutshell, that's this controversy, which we'll get into. But I think that will stop tonight. Next week we'll do the Mishnayot, and there we'll talk about these last Mishnayot. We'll talk about this, what the function, as it were, of Yom Kippur in terms of kapara, because we know that we have other vehicles of kapara besides Yom Kippur, right? We have certain korbanot that we bring, and so forth. So, what is the exact function there? So, we'll talk about that next time. So, are there any questions or comments from what we did today? Good. Okay. So, thank you, everybody, and good to be back. And Bezrat Hashem, I will see you next week.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye bye.